They told them not to look. They told them the Americans would gouge out their eyes if they saw too much, if they dared to witness what came next. So the train had no windows. The air inside was hot, stale, thick with the smell of oil and sweat and quiet terror. Greta Hartman sat pressed against a wooden bench, her hands clenched in her lap, the skin on her knuckles raw from the salt of the sea and the lies of the Reich. She hadn't slept in 3 days. She was 22, born in Berlin, trained as a Luftwaffe radio operator, and shaped, like many of the girls, by steel, silence, and the clipped voices of men who spoke of duty and purity and the glorious destiny of a nation. Her last transmission had been on April 30th. After that, the signal stopped. The sky was empty. The 1,000-year Reich had collapsed into rubble and ash. The war had ended, but not for her. When the British turned them over to American custody in September 1945, they were counted, 847 German women, and told to board the ship quietly. Their feet had barely touched Southampton's dock before the shouting began. Schließ die Augen. Close your eyes. Do not speak. Do not resist. Do not hope. They were packed into the belly of the Liberty ship like crates of spoiled memories, watched by young American MPs who didn't say much but wore faces hardened by years of fighting across oceans. The voyage across the Atlantic was a silence of its own. Greta remembered the cold metal walls, the tin cups, the bowl of watery porridge each morning. No beatings, no guards pulling at them or screaming. Just the unblinking stares and the sea. The sound of it slapping against the hull like it wanted to wash them clean or swallow them whole. And then, after 12 days, land. Texas. They stepped off the train just after dawn. Camp Hearne. September heat still clung to the wooden planks of the platform, but the air was dry and vast. Nothing like Europe. The soil was red, the sun already high enough to burn. Greta blinked at the sudden light. She hadn't seen sunlight in days, and the pain in her chest wasn't from fear this time. It was confusion, because the guards weren't shouting, because the air smelled of something warm. Yeast, she thought. Bread? Because someone was handing her a canvas duffel bag. Inside, 2 sets of clean clothes, a towel, a toothbrush, undergarments, 2 bars of brown army soap wrapped in paper, and a stamped note she couldn't read, because no one hit her. She followed the others down a gravel path, past rows of wooden barracks, past a square where an American flag hung from a pole and gently stirred in the wind, past blooming crepe myrtles and a fat calico cat that sat sunning itself on a window ledge, utterly unbothered by the passing of former enemies. The cat looked at her, blinked, then closed its eyes. They were shown into Barrack 4C. Bunk beds, wool blankets, a window, clean sheets. The floor smelled faintly of bleach and floor wax. Greta stood at the doorway, afraid to move. A guard, young, red-haired, with freckles and a southern accent so thick it barely resembled English, stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't leer. He simply pointed to the corner bunk, then to a basin of fresh water, and held out a piece of chalk. "Name?" he asked. Greta hesitated. Her name had power in Berlin. It meant lineage. It meant service. But here, Hartman, Greta. He scratched it onto the bunk's wood post and nodded. Then he smiled. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't triumphant. It was just a smile. The kind a neighbor might give. The kind Greta hadn't seen in 2 years. Her stomach lurched. She sat down on the bunk. No one spoke for a long time. The other women shuffled in slowly, eyes wide, trying to reconcile the simplicity of the room with the horrors they'd been taught to expect. In Berlin, they'd been told Americans would parade them naked through streets, cut off their hair, brand them like cattle. Instead, someone had folded their towels, laid out beds, lit oil lamps. There were rows of wooden pegs for their uniforms, and the smell of bread drifted in from the mess hall. Greta touched the bar of soap. It was heavy, chalky, the paper damp from the humidity. She brought it to her nose. It smelled like almonds. She closed her eyes, suddenly afraid not of pain, but of what she was beginning to feel. A trembling in the chest, a kind of cracking, like a sheet of ice splitting apart in the first days of spring. One of the girls began to cry, not loud, not sobbing, just a soft weeping into her hands, like she didn't know how to carry this. Greta didn't blame her. No one did. They'd prepared for hunger, for cold, for hatred. They'd even rehearsed how to die with dignity if the Americans made good on their promises of revenge. But no one had prepared for this. No one had prepared for kindness. A corporal stood there. American, mid-30s, heavy boots, clipboard in hand. He didn't raise his voice. He simply read names. Greta's came second. Hartman, Greta. Shower rotation. Bring your towel. She blinked. The women had whispered about the showers all morning. Some feared it meant something else. In Poland, women had been taken for showers and never come back. Greta had seen the films, the photographs. Once, in a darkened Berlin cellar, her superior officer held up a blurry picture of stacked shoes and said, "This is what happens when we lose." That picture sat heavy in her memory now, like a stone. Her legs didn't want to move, but she did. The corporal waited, politely but firmly, down the corridor, across the square. Warm air brushed her cheeks. The sky was a sheet of white blue, so wide it hurt to look at. She saw the cat again, now curled up beneath a wooden bench, purring against the boot of a cook who fed it scraps from a dented tin. And then, the building, showers. The inside was dim, the light flickering slightly through slats in the high wooden walls. The floor was cool concrete, wet and clean. Hooks lined the entrance, each one stamped with numbers. An older woman, one of the camp's Red Cross liaisons, American, calm-faced, offered each prisoner a set of instructions in halting German. No soap and eyes, towels on hook, hot water, 5 minutes. Greta couldn't move. The other women were already beginning, awkwardly, nervously undressing, as if uncertain if this was real. She stood frozen. Her hands trembled, then a hand touched hers. Gisela, thin, with graying hair tucked beneath a prisoner's cap, nodded softly. "Ich glaube, es ist echt," she whispered. "I think it's real." Greta stepped forward. She peeled off the uniform that had clung to her for nearly 2 weeks. The fabric was stiff with salt and sweat. The skin beneath was pale, tight, discolored. She felt vulnerable, naked not only in body, but in soul, as if the layers of training, loyalty, and national pride had been stripped with her buttons. She entered the stall. The pipe overhead sputtered, then hissed, and then came the water. Hot, not lukewarm, not cold, hot. It hit her back like summer rain on cobblestones, like something she had not felt in years. It rolled over her neck, her shoulders, her spine. Her fingers clawed at the soap, and the moment it touched her skin, something broke. It wasn't the heat. It wasn't the smell. It was the care. Someone had packed this soap. Someone had prepared the water. Someone had thought, these women, these enemy women, they deserve to feel clean. Greta bowed her head. The soap lathered easily. The bubbles were soft, sweet-smelling, something like almonds or milk. They coated her arms, her face. Her hands lingered at her collarbone, as if afraid to wipe away the last traces of Berlin. Tears mingled with the water. But she didn't know if they were hers, or why they came. All around her, silence reigned. But not the silence of fear. The silence of collapse. One by one, the women wept. quietly, like old glass breaking inside their chests. Not out of pain, out of disorientation. For so long they had carried shame like a shield. But kindness pierced where cruelty could not. The water kept flowing. It ran down her legs and pooled at her feet, carrying away layers of dirt, salt, and the ghosts of the Reich. For a moment, she imagined her mother, hunched in the ruins of Berlin, waiting in bread lines, praying Greta was still alive. She imagined her walking barefoot through rubble, not knowing her daughter was in Texas, wrapped in steam. Guilt stabbed her, sharp and sudden. She was here, fed, bathed, cared for. Her mother was not. Was this mercy, or was this worse? She rinsed. When the corporal knocked once on the doorframe, the women emerged slowly. Towels clutched to their chests. Some looked away, ashamed to be seen in clean skin. Others simply stared at the floor. But the older American woman smiled. "You okay?" she asked Greta gently, her voice like worn cotton. Greta nodded but couldn't find words. Outside, the sun had risen higher. The red dust shimmered on the path. Back at the barracks, they found folded garments, fresh, neatly creased, placed at the foot of each bed. A slip of paper tucked into each set read, in careful handwriting, "You are safe now. Sleep well tonight. CPLJ Riley, Quartermaster's Staff." Greta held the note in her lap, long after the others had climbed into their bunks. She read it once. Then again. The water had dried, but the feeling hadn't. She wasn't just clean. She was undone. She lay back in bed, eyes open, listening to the hush of the camp outside. Somewhere in the mess tent, they were baking again. The smell of dough hung faintly in the warm evening air, and as she drifted into her first true sleep in weeks, she realized she no longer feared the Americans. She feared what they had shown her. And in the morning, the smell returned. Bread. Not the black, dense bricks of rye that her mother once traded ration stamps for in Berlin. This scent was lighter, warm, yeasted, alive. It drifted through the thin wooden walls of Barrack 4C like a song that refused to die. Greta sat upright before dawn, her blanket twisted around her legs. The others stirred slowly, Sabine coughing softly, Gisela whispering a prayer, someone humming a lullaby half-remembered from childhood. The floorboards creaked beneath their bare feet. Outside, a bugle called in the distance, thin and mournful. Not threatening, but routine. Like the world's heartbeat had returned to its rhythm. When the guard arrived, his steps were steady. "Breakfast?" he said, pointing down the path. They followed him through the camp, past barracks, past a small wooden chapel, past a flag still fluttering in the rising heat. Greta noticed the smell again, stronger now. It came from a low building with 2 chimneys puffing white smoke. The kitchen, inside, the air was dense with warmth. Long wooden tables stretched from wall to wall. Tin trays gleamed faintly in the light, slanting through the windows. The women stood in line, clutching their cups. They waited for the punishment, for the smirk, for the insult, for the inevitable humiliation. Instead, a man with dark skin and kind eyes ladled something thick and golden into her bowl. "Oatmeal," he said slowly, as if teaching her the word. Then he added something else, a square of butter, already melting, and a slice of soft white bread. Greta stared. He didn't mock her. He didn't look at her with hate. He nodded. "Eat. You'll need strength." Her throat tightened. She tried to say danke, but the word stuck. She took her tray to the long table. The benches were smooth from years of use. A few American guards sat across the room, eating their own breakfast quietly. No one shouted. No one watched them like beasts in a cage. The only sounds were spoons tapping bowls and the low hum of conversation. German, English, and something in between. She tore a piece of bread. The crust crackled faintly. When she bit into it, steam filled her mouth. It was soft, warm, alive. Her eyes burned, not because of hunger, though she was hungry beyond words, but because it reminded her of home, of a time before uniforms, before sirens, before her radio station fell silent. Gisela whispered across the table, "They feed us like people." Greta nodded. "They shouldn't," another woman muttered, voice tight with shame. "We bombed their cities. We killed their sons. Why would they?" No one answered. A young soldier passed by carrying a crate of apples. Fresh apples. Red. The color shocked them. He set the crate down near the table and began handing them out, one to each woman. Greta reached hesitantly, expecting him to pull it back. He didn't. When their hands brushed, she froze. His palm was warm, his fingernails clean. The tiniest gesture, a human touch, felt unbearable. She whispered, "Danke." Barely audible. He smiled, small and genuine. "You're welcome, ma'am." Ma'am. The word struck like thunder. She had been called many things by German officers. Frau, Fräulein, Mädchen. But never ma'am. Never with respect. She sat in silence for a long time, turning the apple in her hands. The red skin caught the light. Around her, the women began to eat more freely. Some laughed softly, as if afraid of being overheard by ghosts. For the first time, there was sound. Living sound. Not the mechanical rhythm of orders or boots. Later, as they left the mess hall, Greta looked back. Through the open kitchen door, she saw a small group of American cooks laughing, tossing dough, moving with easy rhythm. A radio played faintly, a woman's voice singing in English, something slow and wistful. She couldn't understand the words, but she felt them. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. Outside, the camp shimmered in the noonday light. Rows of laundry fluttered like flags of surrender. White sheets, socks, uniforms washed and drying. A nurse pushed a cart of bandages down the path, humming. 2 guards fixed a fence post while talking about baseball. Greta stopped and watched them. She couldn't help it. The world was upside down. In Berlin, she had watched American bombers roar overhead, raining fire on her city. She'd seen the sky turn orange. And now, the same people, the same enemy, were giving her bread and soap. It didn't fit. The propaganda reels had shown America as a place of chaos, greed, corruption, men without honor, women without virtue. And yet, here, even in captivity, she saw more dignity than she had known in her own barracks. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the small window, the Texas moonlight pale against the floor. From the distance came faint laughter, guards sharing stories, someone playing a harmonica. A breeze carried the scent of baked flour, soap, and dust. She pressed her hand against the sill. The wood was smooth. A voice came from behind her. Gisela again, whispering from her bunk. "Do you think they hate us?" Greta turned. "If they do," she said quietly, "they hide it better than we did." Silence settled again, deep and strange. The kind that comes not from fear, but from awakening. The mind stretching toward something it was never taught to hold. Greta lay down, her hands folded on her chest. In her mind, the smell of bread lingered. Rising, breaking, softening. She realized she could never again believe what she once broadcast over the radio. The Reich had built walls of hatred that crumbled not from bombs, but from the scent of fresh bread. And in that quiet, she began to understand. The war was not only over, it was unwinding inside her. And yet, each morning, Greta waited by the fence, not because she expected anything, but because routine held meaning in a place where everything else had unraveled. She would stand with the others near the bulletin board where names were called, packages received, letters from home, Red Cross messages. A young sergeant read them aloud in a low Texas drawl, never unkind, but never personal either. Greta listened for her name, always at attention, always still. It never came. In her dreams, Berlin still existed. Not the burned-out husk she'd last heard over the radio, but the Berlin of memory, cold trams clattering past cafes, the bitter smell of coal smoke rising from chimneys, her mother's voice calling from the stairwell. She imagined the letters trapped somewhere, under rubble, or confiscated by guards, or simply unwritten because there was no one left to write. Gisela received a letter once. It was a single page, brittle and folded. She read it silently, lips trembling, then folded it again and placed it beneath her mattress like a talisman. "I still have someone," she whispered later that night, as if confessing a sin. Greta smiled for her and wept for herself. Days passed. The women began to look less like shadows. The heat tanned their skin, filled out their faces. Their eyes no longer darted like hunted things. They mended clothes, swept the barracks, planted flowers along the fence line. But Greta grew quieter. She took to walking the perimeter after dusk. The camp was not cruel. It was clean, orderly, even gentle. But it was still a fence, still a gate. And somewhere beyond it, her mother might be starving, might be buried beneath brick and ash. She hated herself for eating well, for sleeping deeply, for laughing once, when an American guard slipped and spilled a crate of oranges. He'd stood there, red-faced, muttering in English while the fruit rolled across the ground. And for a heartbeat, the women had laughed, honest, breathless, human laughter. Greta had laughed too. And then the guilt wrapped around her ribs like wire. She sat beneath the mess hall steps that night, knees pulled to her chest. The air smelled of heat and rain. A rare thunderstorm had passed earlier, and the red Texas soil still steamed in the fading light. Above her, cicadas hummed like static. She clutched a folded Red Cross form in her hand. Blank, except for her name and prisoner number. She had written to Berlin 4 times. Once to her mother, once to her uncle, once to a friend who might still be alive. No answer. Each day her letters had grown smaller, more desperate. "I am safe. I have food, a bed. Please tell me if you are alive. Please." The last one, she hadn't signed. She couldn't. In the early weeks, some women talked of escape, of cutting through the wire, making it to Mexico, finding a ship. But where would they go? Who would shelter them? They were not soldiers, not criminals, not heroes. They were ghosts, caught between a war that had ended and a world that had not forgiven. One evening, as Greta walked the perimeter again, she saw the chaplain. He was raking gravel by the chapel steps, a tall man, mid-50s, with a limp and a kindness that unsettled her. He nodded as she approached. "Evening." She hesitated, then spoke. "Why do you treat us well?" He leaned on the rake. "Because hate is heavy," he said. "And this war, it already buried enough hearts." She looked at his hands, scarred, burned maybe. "You were a soldier?" He nodded. "Chaplain Corps, Italy." She swallowed. Did Germans kill your friends?" He didn't flinch. "Yes. And still this." He met her gaze. "Mercy isn't weakness, Miss Hartman. It's survival." She felt her throat close. "You can't show kindness unless you've been broken," he added, almost gently. "And war breaks us all." He turned back to the rake. Greta stood there a long time. When she returned to the barracks, the lights were dim. Gisela was asleep, her hand curled around the edge of her blanket like a child's. Sabine snored softly in the corner. Greta pulled out her Red Cross form again. She stared at the blank page. Then she wrote, "I saw kindness today, and I do not know what to do with it." She folded it, placed it beneath her pillow, and whispered to the dark, "Bitte, Mama, I am still your daughter, even if I am changing." The wind crept through the cracks in the wood. Somewhere, the harmonica played again. Low, aching, human. Greta listened with her eyes closed. In Berlin, the only music left had been sirens. Now, even silence had become a song. But it was the soap that broke her. Not the kind wrapped in brown army paper, not the kind handed out on arrival, but something smaller, more delicate. It came on a Monday. Late September. The Texas air was dry and restless, carrying the smell of mesquite trees and scorched earth. Greta had just finished laundry duty, scrubbing bed sheets at the outdoor basin with Gisela and 2 other women. The soap left their hands raw. The sun left their necks blistered. But no one complained. Not anymore. They had learned the rhythm of captivity. Not bitter, just strange. That afternoon, as she wrung out the last sheet and hung it on the line, a shadow fell across her arms. She looked up. An American nurse stood there. Late 20s, auburn hair tied beneath a white cap, a red cross patch stitched neatly onto her sleeve. She was holding something in her palm. "Für dich," the nurse said in awkward German. "A gift." Greta blinked. The woman placed it gently in Greta's hand. A bar of milled soap, pale ivory, wrapped in a waxed paper, stamped Lux. Beneath the wrapper, the faint scent of lavender and something softer. Vanilla, maybe. Beneath that, something Greta hadn't smelled in years. Perfume, not strong, not showy. Just the suggestion of something feminine. Greta's hands curled around it instinctively. She could not speak. The nurse gave a brief smile and walked away. No explanation. No performance. Just a quiet gesture, as if the world had not been on fire 6 months earlier. Greta stood there long after the other women had returned to the barracks. Her hands shook. That night, she unwrapped the soap slowly, carefully, as if it might shatter in her hands. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface. It was shaped like a petal, curved and perfect, untouched by war. She held it to her face and wept, because it smelled like life before uniforms, before ration books, before Berlin crumbled into dust. It smelled like the blouse she wore at 17, pressed and sweet. It smelled like her sister's hair on Sunday mornings. It smelled like her mother's arms when she came home from school. It smelled like Greta Hartmann, not Gefreite Hartmann, the radio operator. Not prisoner Zberwuntine 4589. Not the nameless face behind a chain-link fence. Just a woman, a daughter, and for one unbearable moment, a human being. She sat on the bunk, the soap clutched in both hands, her shoulders quaking under the weight of memory. Sabine stirred in the top bunk. "Was es los? What's wrong?" Greta couldn't answer. She only held out the soap. Sabine sniffed it. Her breath caught. "Mein Gott, is that lavender?" Greta nodded. They passed it around like a relic. Each woman held it for a few seconds, breathing it in, silently, reverently, as if touching something forbidden and holy. No one asked where it came from. They knew what it meant. It meant someone had seen them, not as prisoners, not as Germans, not as enemies, as women. And that was harder to bear than any punishment. The Reich had taught them that weakness was treason, that emotion was indulgence, that cleanliness was a duty, not a joy. But here, in the hands of the enemy, was a gift so gentle it stripped their armor away. Gisela tucked it beneath her pillow when they slept. "To keep the dreams kind," she said. The next morning, Greta used only a sliver. She washed her hands slowly, letting the lather linger. The scent clung to her wrists all day. A faint reminder, invisible but impossible to forget. And yet, the guilt returned. It returned every time she remembered the hunger in Berlin. The children she had seen begging near the S-Bahn. The old woman who collapsed on Friedrichstrasse in March. The voices on the radio, frantic, desperate, choking on smoke. Why did she deserve soap? Why, when her people had none? That night, she stood by the fence again. The moon was a thin scar above the horizon. The air smelled of dust and cooked beans. She clutched the soap in her fist, trembling. She wanted to throw it, to reject it, to reject the shame it brought. But she couldn't, because it wasn't just soap. It was the answer to a question she'd never dared ask. What if everything we believed was wrong? The soap said yes, it was. She sat down in the dirt, knees pulled tight. Somewhere, a train whistle echoed faintly across the plains. She remembered Berlin again and wept, but not for the Reich, not for her pride, for herself, for the girl who had forgotten how to smell like lavender, not all at once, not like a flood or a strike of lightning. It came in traces, in the way her hands no longer cracked from soap, in how her face reflected softly in the basin water instead of looking back like a stranger, in the way she no longer flinched when the guards walked past. The fence didn't disappear, but it changed. At first, it was a wound, barbed, cold, humming with a silent threat. Then it became a wall, then a symbol, then something else entirely. It began one morning when a bird landed on it, a mockingbird, gray, small, unafraid. It balanced on the top wire just feet away from the women as they swept the yard. Greta paused, broom in hand, and watched. It sang, clear, beautiful, unbothered. No one moved. The wind carried the notes over the dust. For a moment, the camp was still. Not silent, but stilled. The bird didn't care about uniforms or accents or who had surrendered to whom. And then it flew away. Sabine exhaled. That bird doesn't know we're prisoners. Gisela added, maybe it knows and sings anyway. Greta smiled, a real smile. The first in weeks. Later that day, she was assigned to assist in the infirmary, cleaning bandage trays, fetching water, folding linens. The Red Cross nurse was there, the same woman who'd given her the perfumed soap. They didn't speak at first, just worked side by side. Greta scrubbed with quiet focus. But as the sun slanted through the window and cast warm light across the tiled floor, something loosened. The nurse, Eleanor, she said her name was, offered her a glass of lemonade. Cold, tangy, sweet. Greta drank slowly. The chill made her teeth ache, but the taste was worth it. You always this quiet? Eleanor asked gently. Greta hesitated. Then, only since the war ended. Eleanor nodded. She didn't press. After that day, Greta returned to the infirmary often. Voluntarily, she liked the quiet hum of it, the rhythm of care, the clean order of cotton and gauze. She watched Eleanor treat wounded guards, mop up coughs, help elderly prisoners with aching joints. There were no uniforms in sickness, only bodies, pain, and hands trying to ease it. Once, she saw a black American medic wrap a bandage around a German soldier's fractured wrist. The same soldier who'd been a hard man back in Barrack 2D, full of pride and bitterness. The medic didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. Greta didn't know what to make of it. In the Reich, such things would have been unthinkable. Here, they happened daily, and the fence kept humming. But now it felt like something else. Like a line meant to keep them safe from the world outside, not punished within. Greta wrote more letters, still no replies. But she wrote anyway. She told her mother about the bird, about the soap, about the bread, about the nurse. She wrote not to be heard, but to remember. To hold in her mind a version of herself that was becoming new, not washed clean of guilt. No. Guilt still pulsed beneath her skin like an old wound, but softened, seen, human. One day, in early October, the chaplain invited the women to attend a short reading. No religion, just words, he said. About light and dignity. They gathered on benches beneath a shade awning near the chapel. The Texas sky was a flat canvas of blue. The chaplain read from something American. Lincoln, maybe. Greta didn't understand every word, but the sound of it moved her. He said something about mercy, something about rebuilding. And then, the fences we carry are the ones hardest to tear down. Greta didn't look at the wires that surrounded them. She looked at her hands. They were calloused from labor, stained with soap, but clean. No blood, no radio static, no lies. When the reading ended, no one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, Eleanor passed around a tin of peppermint candies. Just one each. Greta placed it on her tongue and closed her eyes. The sweetness made her chest ache, not because of pleasure, because it reminded her that she was still capable of feeling it. That night, she returned to the fence. Not in sorrow, but in silence. The mockingbird was there again. This time it didn't sing. It only perched, a shadow against the rising moon. Greta whispered to it, not in words, but in being. She leaned on the post, her breath steady, her thoughts slow. The world was no longer fire and ash. It was dust and bread, soap and sweat, music on the wind. She was still a prisoner, but she was also alive. And the fence, though still there, no longer caged her soul. But the nights were turning colder. October wind crawled in through the slats in the wooden walls, carrying the scent of dry leaves and far-off smoke. Even in Texas, autumn had a voice. It whispered through the barracks like a warning. Change is coming. Greta pulled her wool blanket tighter each evening, but it wasn't enough. The government-issue fabric had worn thin. It barely held warmth anymore, only memory of ships, of rail cars, of arrival. She didn't complain. None of them did. They were alive, fed, safe. But safety couldn't chase the cold from their bones. Then came the night of the blanket exchange. She hadn't known it had a name. It started during roll call. The guards were quieter than usual. One or two wore new jackets, thicker canvas lined at the collar. Winter prep. At sundown, the young corporal with the red hair, Riley, she now knew his name, approached Barrack 4C holding a clipboard and 2 folded wool blankets. He knocked once, waited, then stepped just inside the doorway. "Need volunteers for inventory swap," he said. "Some of the old issue is being rotated out. Cold front's coming." No one moved. The women glanced at each other. Was this another test? A trick? Riley looked around, scratching the back of his neck. Then, "It's not a punishment, it's just blankets." Still silence. Greta stood, slowly. "I'll help," she said. He nodded once. "All right, follow me." She stepped outside. The sky had dimmed to a smoky purple, stars beginning to blink in the wide open dark. They walked in silence toward the quartermaster's shed. The earth crunched beneath their boots. At the door, Riley pushed it open and motioned inside. Stacks of supplies, linens, boots, canned rations, the smell of cedar and motor oil. He handed her a thick blanket. It was clean, heavy, still smelling faintly of machine grease and cotton. Then another. "Take these to your girls," he said. "You need 'em more than we do tonight." She looked at him. The lantern light caught his freckles. He was no older than she was. "You're giving us new ones?" He shrugged. "Doesn't make sense letting them sit in a shed when someone's freezing 10 feet away." She hesitated. "Why are you kind to us?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "My uncle was in a German camp, in 44. He said the worst part wasn't the cold or hunger. It was being treated like an animal." Greta felt her throat tighten. "I figured," he added, "if we're gonna build anything after this damn war, we'd better start acting like people again." She swallowed hard. "Danke," she whispered. He nodded once. "Sleep well, ma'am." "Ma'am." Again that word. Simple. Crushing. She carried the blankets back like sacred cloth. The others sat up as she entered. No one asked questions. She handed one to Gisela, another to Sabine. They touched the fabric like it might vanish. "It's warm," Gisela murmured. Sabine held hers to her cheek. "It smells like a store." They lay down quietly that night. cocooned in something deeper than wool. Greta lay awake longer, not from cold, from warmth. A kind of warmth she hadn't known since childhood. Not physical, but human. She thought about Riley, about his uncle, about the way his voice had cracked slightly when he said animal. She remembered a day in Berlin when a Russian prisoner had slipped on ice and a German officer had kicked him. Laughed. She had laughed too. She was 19. She had believed in control, in superiority, in fate. But superiority had given her nothing. And here, an equal hand had given her warmth. A blanket. No speech. No guilt. No conditions. Just here. Sleep better tonight. That small mercy burned brighter than 1,000 flags. In the stillness, Greta pressed the blanket tighter to her chest and closed her eyes, not to shut the world out, but to hold this moment in. In the morning, the barracks were quiet. Warmer. No frost on the footlockers. The smell of coffee and flour drifted in early. Greta stepped outside. The fence caught the light like silver thread. A guard stood at the far end, leaning casually on his post, humming something under his breath. The mockingbird was back. It perched on the wire. Didn't sing, but it didn't fly away either, and neither did Greta. She stood beneath it, face tilted toward the pale sun, wrapped in a blanket that didn't belong to her, but felt like it did. Not because she had earned it, but because someone had offered it anyway. And that, she realized, was how peace might begin. Not in treaties, but in hands extended across fences, with no demand, only warmth. And then, one afternoon, the radio played again. It wasn't loud. It didn't blare orders or national anthems or war bulletins. It simply played music. Soft, melodic, drifting from the open window of the administrative office where an American sergeant sat writing in a ledger. Greta was hauling buckets from the laundry basin when she heard it. At first, she froze. For her, radios had never meant beauty. They had meant codes, panic, orders shouted through static. The last time she had keyed in a transmission, Berlin had still stood, or what was left of it. The silence that followed her final message felt like the end of the world. But this was Ella Fitzgerald. Her voice rose on the wind like smoke, honeyed, sad, and impossibly alive. I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places. The sound struck Greta like a bullet. But it wasn't pain. It was memory uncoiled. She dropped the bucket, water sloshing onto the dry dust, and turned toward the sound. The other women noticed it too. Heads lifted, hands stilled. In a camp where even laughter had once seemed dangerous, now there was this jazz. American jazz, Sabine whispered. Is that allowed? Gisela crossed herself. It's from a radio, in the open. It must be. Greta didn't move. She was no longer in Texas. She was 19 again. Sitting in a bunker outside Tempelhof, headphones pressed to her ears, fingers flying over the transmitter keys, translating coded bursts into the language of war. She remembered the low hum of the equipment, the urgency in her throat, the weight of knowing she was part of something vast and cruel. And she remembered the day it went silent, the day her station lost power and never came back. But now the radio sang. And the voice wasn't German. It wasn't American. It wasn't enemy or ally. It was something else. It was human. She stepped closer to the building. Not enough to cross a line, just enough to hear more. The windows were open. Inside, the sergeant was humming along as he filled out paperwork. He glanced up, saw her, and didn't stop the music. He only nodded once. Greta stood very still, letting the notes wash over her like warm rain. I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day. She didn't understand all the words, but she didn't need to. She understood the ache in the melody, the longing, the sense of having lost something dear, a person, a place, a self, and maybe the hope of finding it again. Later that evening, the women gathered near the laundry benches, a place now shaded and swept clean. Someone whispered that the chaplain had been given permission to play music at sundown. Morale, the Americans called it. For them, for the prisoners. The Americans had brought out an old wood-framed radio, set it gently on a crate, and turned the dial. The signal crackled, drifted, then settled. Swing music, trumpets, a woman's laugh, a lull in time. They didn't crowd around it. They sat near it, respectfully distant, like children listening to a story they weren't sure they deserved to hear. Greta sat with her legs folded beneath her, hands in her lap, eyes closed. She could feel the bass through the ground. A quiet rhythm, a heartbeat returning to the world. When the song changed, she recognized it again. This time Glenn Miller. Moonlight Serenade, no lyrics. Just the slow swell of strings, the velvet brass, the ache of something once beautiful. She began to cry, not violently, not ashamed, just tears that rose uninvited and fell without struggle. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden knowing that she hadn't died after all, that something inside her had survived. She felt Gisella's hand rest on her back. Sabine pressed a folded cloth into her palm. No one asked what was wrong. They understood. It wasn't the war that broke her. It was the fact that music could still exist after it. She remembered the propaganda slogans. Degenerate music, Negro jazz, cultural poison. She remembered the smuggled records that had been smashed under boots. The girls dismissed from service for humming Gershwin. The unspoken rule, melody belonged to the past, but now it belonged to everyone. That night, back in Barrack 4C, Greta sat by the window, her journal open in her lap. The pages were nearly full now. Letters never sent, thoughts never shared. Sketches of fences and birds, of radios, of bread. She picked up her pencil and wrote, "Today I heard music again, not as a soldier, not as a prisoner, just as a person." She stopped, then added, "I used to send signals, now I receive them." Outside, the wind stirred the trees. A lone harmonica played somewhere down the path, slow and full, like it had learned the language of silence, and now chose each note carefully. Greta closed her eyes. In her memory, the code keys still clicked, fast, mechanical, dutiful. But in her heart, there was only melody now. And then, as if summoned by that quiet song, the letter came. It was late October. The air had shifted again, thinner, crisper, the evenings now cool enough for breath to show in the morning. Greta had stopped checking the mailboard, not because she no longer cared, but because caring was beginning to ache in a place too deep to name. Until that morning, she was walking back from kitchen duty, her sleeves rolled, apron dusted with flour, when Riley, the red-haired corporal, jogged toward her. No rifle, just a small manila envelope in hand. His expression was unreadable. "Mail call," he said. Greta blinked. "For me?" He nodded, held it out gently. The envelope was wrinkled, yellowing, stamped with the Red Cross seal. It had been opened, inspected, resealed. The handwriting was barely legible, her mother's, but fragile, as if written with trembling fingers. Greta held it like a wounded bird. She whispered, "Danke," and turned away before the tears reached her throat. She didn't open it immediately. She went back to the barracks, sat on the edge of her bunk, and held it in her lap. The others gathered quietly. They knew. Gisela placed a hand on her knee. Sabine whispered, "Go slowly." Greta nodded and broke the seal. The letter inside was written on thin brown paper, reused, faded at the edges. It was short, barely one page, but it was everything. Her mother's handwriting curved shakily across the page. "My dearest Greta, if this letter finds you, then we are still lucky. I was told by a neighbor that you were taken by the Americans. For weeks, I thought you were dead. Or worse. Now I hear whispers that you are alive. Alive in Texas, of all places. It sounds like a dream. Berlin is gone. The house is gone. Your aunt is dead. Your cousin is missing. But I am still here. I live in a single room now. The neighbors are kind. There's a church nearby. Sometimes they give me bread. The city smells like smoke and wet stone. But the war is over. The noise has stopped. I worry what you must think of me, of what I allowed you to become. We all believed things, Greta. Things that now feel like dust. I am sorry. If the Americans are kind to you, let them be. Accept it. Let go. We are all changing now. We must. You were always my bright one. I remember your voice on the stairs. You sang when you were little. Do you remember? I do. Sing again, Greta. Even if it is far from home. Even if it is in a language you do not yet understand. I love you. I miss you. I forgive you, Mama. Greta didn't make a sound. She folded the letter once, twice, pressed it to her lips, and then she wept. The others did not touch her. They gave her space. But they stayed close, a quiet circle of women who knew that sometimes it is not bombs that break a person, but paper. She kept the letter tucked inside her uniform pocket for days. She read it again before sleep. She read it again in the morning. Each time, a different line struck her. Let go, sing again, I forgive you. The last one hurt the most, because Greta hadn't yet forgiven herself. She had followed orders. She had believed. She had sent signals that helped destroy cities, cities that now buried children like her cousin. She had laughed when she should have cried, saluted when she should have walked away. But her mother's words, brittle, honest, and unflinching, cracked something open inside her. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine life after the fence. Not escape, return to something smaller, softer, truer. Not the Reich, not the radio towers, but something like forgiveness. A few days later, she asked the chaplain if she could write a response. He gave her paper. She sat in the chapel alone, light streaming through the slatted windows, and wrote slowly, Dearest Mama, I am alive. The Americans are not monsters. They are men and women with hands and hearts and tired eyes. One gave me soap. Another gave me bread. A boy with freckles gave me a blanket when the wind turned cold. I am not the girl you raised. But I am no longer the soldier I became. Something is changing in me, like the trees I see beyond the fence. I do not know what season I am in, only that I am not what I was. I smell again, I hear again, I feel again, and now I sing again. I love you. I miss you. I carry you with me in every breath. Greta. She sent it with trembling hands. Whether it would arrive, she didn't know. But it had been written, and that perhaps was enough. The leaves had begun to fall. Thin, dry, curling like burnt paper across the red dust of Texas. A notice was posted on the camp board. Repatriation scheduled. Transport orders issued. Names listed. Greta read hers in silence. Hartman, Greta. Camp Hearne, Port of New York, Bremerhaven. Departure, November 12th, 1945. She didn't feel relief, nor dread, only stillness. She folded the notice and placed it in her journal beside her mother's letter. The pages now smelled faintly of lavender soap, dried cotton, and pencil lead. The scent of a life she hadn't expected to live. Word spread fast. The women reacted in different ways. Some cheered, some prayed, some cried. Sabine wept openly, clutching her Red Cross blanket. It's strange. I thought I wanted to go home more than anything. But now, what even is home? No one answered. The question didn't need one. Greta wandered to the edge of the camp that evening, to the place where the mockingbird sometimes perched. It was gone now. Perhaps flown south. Perhaps simply done singing. But the fence was still there. She placed her hand on the post, not in resistance, in reverence. How strange, she thought, that something built to contain could also protect. That within these wires, she had unlearned hatred and remembered herself. That night, she sat with Riley, the red-haired corporal, one last time. He had brought her coffee in a chipped enamel mug, still warm. They didn't talk about the war. They talked about music, about the future, about what kind of winter Berlin might be facing. He said, "You'll be going back to ruins." Greta nodded, "And yet, something inside me feels rebuilt." He looked down, fidgeted. Then, hesitating, he handed her a small parcel wrapped in a handkerchief. "For the road." Inside was a piece of soap, Lux, like the first one, and a folded slip of paper with a single sentence scrawled in nervous handwriting. "You deserve to be seen." Greta didn't cry. She only held it and whispered, "Thank you." November 12th came like a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. They were given new coats, modest rations, and wool gloves. The guards lined up as the women boarded the trucks. There were no speeches, no salutes, just nods, quiet eyes, and just before the engine rumbled to life, someone called from the gate, "Close your eyes." Greta turned. It was an older guard, one of the men who had once glared at them like threats. Now, his voice was soft. "It's how we were trained," he said. "At the end, we were told to make you close your eyes, not look, not feel, just obey." He paused. "But you don't have to, not anymore." Greta looked out across the field. The sun was rising, pale orange, filtering through the trees, catching on the fence one last time. She didn't close her eyes. She stared at it all. The mess hall, the infirmary, the chapel, the steps where she once sat with soap in her hands and guilt in her chest. The mockingbird never returned. But in her heart, it still sang. As the truck pulled away, she whispered to herself, "I will remember this place, not as a camp, but as a threshold, a gate between two lives, a place where the enemy had become the one who held out a blanket, the one who shared their bread, the one who turned on a radio and let her cry without shame." She watched the buildings fade behind the dust trail. The wind was cold now, but she wasn't. Inside her coat, she still carried her mother's letter, the lavender soap, and the folded note that read, "You deserve to be seen." In the years to come, Greta never quite returned to who she'd been before. She walked through the ruins of Berlin with quiet steps. She rebuilt a life, brick by humble brick. She never rejoined the military, never touched a radio again, but she sang, softly, to herself, to children, to strangers, in train stations, in markets, in kitchens with the windows cracked open to let in the sound of birds. She wrote letters, always beginning with, "I am still here," and each time she saw barbed wire, on fences, on borders, in memories, she didn't flinch. She remembered what could live inside the wire: soap, bread, a blanket, a song, and the way kindness, given in silence, could remake a soul more completely than any army ever could. They told them to close their eyes, but Greta Hartman never would again.